In regards to staff language, we like to say words have the energy and power with the ability to help, to heal, to hinder, to hurt, to harm, to humiliate, and to humble. We say this because it's true, and we say this because it's really important that when we talk to and about our students, we're talking about them with dignity and respect. We want dignity and respect to be the foundations of this section. So this is an activity that we do in our in-person Autism 101 trainings. This is a neurodiverse affirming language. So this means language that is holding that dignity and respect aspect to it. Now, if you use some of the old language, that doesn't mean you're a bad person. That doesn't mean it's necessarily offensive. It's just if you know better, we can do better. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about each language or terminology piece, and we're going to go through and talk about more affirming language that we can use and replace these things with. So when we go forth, we know that we are holding our students with dignity and respect. So the first one we're going to look at is child with autism versus autistic child. So this is a big one because as educators, we've been ingrained that it is always person first language, and that is still true. However, the autistic community has come out and said, hey, we're not ashamed that we have autism. It's a part of us. So we don't mind if you call us autistic. We always recommend that you maybe just ask your students what they prefer. We have asked a few here at Project Access. Every time we meet somebody with autism, we always say, hey, what's your preference? And a lot of them don't actually care or mind which one. However, some people do. And so it's really important that we're being affirming. And so we want to recommend that you go ahead and just ask them. And if you don't have the capability or you don't have the ability or opportunity to ask, maybe just err on the side of caution and just go with person first language. The next one is high functioning versus low support needs. So we want to go with low support needs here. When we say things like higher functioning or low functioning, it doesn't really tell us much about our student, and it kind of blanket statements their ability level. With autism, the ability level changes based on skill or activity. So a student who is high functioning or low support needs in academics might be low functioning or high support needs in sensory accommodation. So it's really important that we don't just blanket statement and we talk about the things that we need to do to support our students. So instead of saying high functioning, we can say low support needs, meaning they need little support in this area. The next one is traits of autism or red flags of autism. This seems like a no-brainer, but believe it or not, red flags of autism has been used before. So when we say things like red flags, it kind of insinuates something negative. You know, if my best friend is dating somebody and we are talking about all their red flags, those are things that are bad about that person, right? So we wouldn't want to talk about our students that way. So we want to say traits of autism or characteristics of autism. The next one is high support needs or low functioning. So we kind of touched on this one a couple steps back, but we want to go with high support needs here. So again, if we're saying low functioning, it's blanket statement that their ability level is low. However, we're going to talk about the ways that we can support them, and we can support them a lot in this area. So high support needs for that one. The next one is obsessions versus deep interest. We're going to say deep interest. Obsessions, again, has that negative connotation to it. So when we're talking about things like their perseverative interests, so we mentioned bugs earlier, or trash cans, or vacuums, or planes, or trains, or automobiles. Those can be things that our students perseverate on or really, really love. But instead of saying, oh my goodness, Finley is obsessed with trains, we're going to say Finley has a deep interest for trains. She really loves them. Instead of nonverbal, we're going to say non-vocal or non-speaking. So this is also a big one because if you say nonverbal, that doesn't mean it's bad. You're not a bad teacher or a bad person. I still say it sometimes. But what we're going to steer towards is more affirming language, right? when we say things like nonverbal, it's giving the idea that they don't have a way to communicate, and that's absolutely not true. Even the most intensive support needs students are trying to communicate with us, even that if that's through alternative communication like PECS or AAC, or it might be through body language or hitting or kicking or biting. Those are all forms of communication. So even if they don't use spoken language, they're still trying to communicate with us. And so when we say things like, oh, they're nonverbal, it doesn't give anybody an idea of how they can communicate with that individual. So we want to say non-vocal or non-speaking. Um, so just because somebody is nonverbal does not mean that they are non-hearing or non-understanding or they don't have anything to say. So we don't want to just assume something about a student just because they are non-speaking, right? So when I talked about the level of support and how autism spectrum is not just a linear spectrum, this is a great visual that we like to show. So on the left side, you see that it says less autistic or more autistic, and it's that linear spectrum. But we want to get that out of our heads because autism spectrum disorder does not range from less autistic or more autistic. It more so looks like all these characteristics of autism, and each individual can have a little bit of one characteristic and have a lot of another characteristic, and everybody looks different. So instead of looking linear, it looks more like everybody just has a little bit of piece of the pie. And that's what's super cool about autism. It's that we see these common characteristics with autism that we discussed earlier. However, the way that they present in each individual person is different. So yes, the accommodations and support that we can provide for our students might be the same, but we're going to have to level it out or change it to fit each individual person. So again, the autism spectrum is not linear. We're not looking at less autistic or more autistic, but it's more so by the skill and the level of support that we need. So we're going to look at this. I was talking about the functioning level before and how we want to steer away from saying high functioning, low functioning. Instead, we're going to talk about support needs. So for example, this specific student looks like this. For expressive communication, they are high support needs. So this might look like a student who uses an alternative form of communication, such as PECS or sign language. But when it comes to academics, they're low support needs. They don't need a lot of help. Maybe a visual support for directions or task analysis or something like that. But, they're pretty academically independent. However, when it comes to sensory support, they're high support needs again. So they might need extra sensory breaks, sensory input, they might go to OT, things like that. And we want to talk about behavior. Behavior is on a need-to-know basis. A lot of times when we're working with more aggressive students, it can feel really targeted and it can be really draining. And you should absolutely have somebody you can go to and vent to. However, when we talk about behavior being on a need-to-know basis, we don't need to be going and telling our friends who work at the bank how terrible so-and-so is in your classroom. Or we don't need to go down to the PE coach if they don't even deal with that student and tell them about how, oh my goodness, they are tearing apart your room, they're such an awful kid, yada, yada, yada. Those things are far too common. And while, yes, those things happen, and we do need somebody to talk to, but we want to make sure that those people are on the need-to-know basis. So that might look like a process coordinator, an admin, a para, the child's education team. We want to be able to talk and vent because these behaviors aren't easy. Being in the classroom isn't always easy, and we definitely need a lot of support and somebody to be able to talk to. However, what we want to remember here is we're using dignity and respect. So if you're telling the cool PE coach down the hall how awful this kid is and their sibling walks by, that might be picked up by that sibling and might not make them feel good. Or something more common is talking about the student who might be non-speaking and they're in the room. You might talk about them to another teacher or the para. I've gone into classrooms before, and just because the kids are non-speaking doesn't mean they're not understanding what you're saying. So a lot of times, like paras and teachers will talk across the room about the student's behavior. But our students are super smart. They're going to pick up on the things that you're saying. And so this is why we need to have a place to vent, but it needs to be a private place, and that person needs to be on that need to know basis. Because at the end of the day, we're not going to put it on the student. We're going to figure out what we need to do to support them, and why, yes, you absolutely need to vent, yell, cry, scream, because bad days are bad days. We just want to make sure that we are coming back to the basis and the foundation of, okay, how can I support this student, and how can we build respect and dignity back here? So I'm not going to have you go to a discussion board this time, but I just want you to take a moment, pause the video, and think about who is on your support team. So on those days that you need to vent and cry and scream or laugh even, who are the people that you are going to go to that are on that need to know basis? To put that into perspective, if you have a really bad day and you go home and you yell at your significant other, and later you guys have dinner plans with your friends, would you want to go in and them say, hey, this is my partner, and they're verbally aggressive? Absolutely not. We wouldn't want one bad moment or one bad day absolutely determine what people think about you, and you wouldn't want to be described like that. So the idea here is we don't want to describe our students that way. So which one sounds better? Katie is super low functioning, she is nonverbal, and wreaks havoc on our classroom. She throws desks and chairs, and we constantly have to clear the room. Or, Katie is one of my learners with more intensive support needs. She is currently communicating with pictures, and we are working on some target behaviors for property destruction. Obviously the second one, right? Katie is one of the learners with more intensive support needs. So it says, hey, she's high support needs. We're going to have to support her a ton. But she's currently communicating with pictures. So it doesn't say, hey, she's non-speaking. It actually gives you a way that you can communicate with Katie. And it says, yeah, we have some behaviors of property destruction, but it's a target behavior. So we're actually putting interventions in place to work on them. The second one just has that dignity and respect aspect to it. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to use the scenarios or the descriptions of students, and you're going to rewrite them to make them using more neurodiverse affirming language that we just talked about. So we're going to put into practice what we just talked about. Kind of like the Katie example, we're going to take one description and make it a ton better using dignity and respect.